Thank you once again to everyone whose name you see on screen now for helping make this all possible. I promised I was going to get a week early video done this weekend because the art book would come out on Monday, and then we started getting art book stuff on Friday, so this stuff is time sensitive and is unfortunately going to have to be out when it's out. That being said, that video I was planning on making is still in the pipeline, and it will be your first week early video whenever I'm able to get to it, and I'm not just making constant stuff about this one book. For everyone else, this video will contain spoilers for the entire numbered Xenoblade Chronicles trilogy. You're seeing this video the day the art book officially comes out, but for a few days now, there have been several pages that have already been posted online, some of which have proper translations. And who could have possibly guessed? They keep saying that I was right about almost everything. As of recording this, the only pages that have fully been posted online are 430 through 447. Despite Aionios Moments being an art book, these pages consist of almost no actual art, and are purely the developer and artist interviews that were advertised, including responses to the fan survey. While the book does also contain a printing of all of the campsite dialogue from the main game and affinity scenes from Future Redeemed, a preview page showed that starts on page 404, which means there are 400 pages of art, commentary on that art, and potentially other story and lore clarifications and tidbits like were in the previous game's art books that we know nothing about and are only going to start learning about the day this video goes out, as more people are generally able to get books. As far as I can tell, barring a very small amount of early shipments, the only places people have gotten there so far are Japanese physical retailers breaking street date. While only 4% of the book has been put online so far, the part we have is the developer interview, so a lot of the interesting lore details are going to be in there. I have read through the entire thing with machine translation, and there is a lot of stuff, but it's machine translation. It is going to get a lot of things wrong, and the scans are not in good enough quality for something like Google Lens to even accurately pick up all the text in the first place. So there's no point to making a video yet? That too is wrong though, as Lugalbanda, the fan translator who's been responsible for a lot of important projects for the fan community in the West, namely translating the Siren model kit, as well as a few supplemental Xenoblade X materials, and pointing out a few very vital mistranslations in Xenoblade 2 and 3, has already done a broad strokes bullet point translation of several important parts of these 18 pages. Both the scans that have been used and Lugalbanda's blog posts will be linked in the description of the video, and I will only be going over the stuff Lugalbanda has properly translated. There is no point in discussing anything that has not had a human translated into English yet. And I do know that a very large group of fan translators associated with the Files from the Zohar Twitter account is working on something for the entire book. So this is just a taste of things to come, though it does probably contain the most vital information. I will still probably reference things that I've read from the machine translation, but I will be sure to point it out every single time that happens as an indicator that you should not take anything I say about that stuff as a fact. Before we get started, I do have one last thing to say here, and that is, don't get excited for a huge amount of major lore reveals. Most of the untranslated stuff is pretty interesting. It's about the developer's process on working through the games, their philosophies, stuff they put in it, inspirations, and that kind of thing. But the lore stuff is largely confirmation of things I've been saying for almost 2 years now. So you're not going to get blown away by a lot of things here. Most of the quote-unquote lore drops are just official confirmations of very obvious subtext that anyone paying attention should have noticed the first time through the game. And since I had a lot of people yelling at me whenever I talked about this kind of thing, basically since the game came out, the video is going to be more of an I told you so and consolidation of various topics I've mentioned since Xenoblade 3 came out than anything. Though the artist part of the interview is basically untranslated, I would like to talk about it just because there are some new pieces of art, and I would like to discuss a little bit of art in this video on an art book. At the bottom of page 434, we have concept art of Melia. On the left is an early version of her outfit, this one with a completely different color palette, a lot of different pieces, no leggings, and more wings on her shoulders, as well as much more pronounced rainbow colors in the Telethia wings floating behind her. Those rainbow wings are present in her official art in the final game, but they don't really appear that much in the game itself, much more just plain looking gold. So I do think we kind of missed out on that. The middle image is much closer to her final outfit, though this one takes a lot more color inspiration from her base game Xenoblade 1 outfit as opposed to her future connected one. She does have a headpiece she doesn't have in the final game, but as far as the actual outfit goes, that is largely the same. On the right, we just have a version of Noah in the Royal Summoner outfit, but with that old color palette as opposed to the final one. At the bottom of the next page are some early versions of Mio, and these are very interesting because they obviously predate any of the concept art from this special edition art book, but I can very, very confidently say the image on the right with the braid is the earliest one, the one in the middle with the longer, fluffier hair is an intermediate one, and the final one where she has virtually her final hairstyle but still a very different outfit is the most recent one, and the last one before they started going down the direction of the outfit she has in the game. I say this because, while we don't have early versions of the concept art for the main cast, there are pieces of environmental concept art in the special edition art book that released with the game itself, and one of these pieces is this one, featuring a giant Faranis and 6 characters in front of it. People made up that these were the founders, which was never true. This was early concept for the final party, and you can still very clearly match each of these characters to one of the characters in the final party of 6, but besides Uni and kind of Senna, there are a lot of design iterations that they had to go through to get to these characters. The obvious thing, though, is the girl in the center with the spear is very clearly the same design as this early Mio concept with the long braid and the Ellie Xenogears looking outfit. I guess this means that not only was Mio's race changed from humanoid to Gormati during development, but even her weapon type was as well, though given how polearms are usually depicted in JRPGs, she was probably always supposed to be a fast, agile dodge tank. This suggests to me that Mio was also not always going to be Nia's kid, because not only was she not Gormati from the beginning, but none of these 3 pieces show her with a core crystal, so that might have been a later development when they were figuring out exactly how they wanted to work previous characters into the game. Without having access to the actual concept pages for Mio herself, which are going to be way, way earlier in the book, I can't confirm for sure, but it's probably likely that there will be more iterations on these early designs back there, as well as incarnations of the other 5 main characters that resemble the ones in the piece of art from the original Special Edition book. Next, on page 437, this is a section where the artists are talking about various non-main characters, so supporting characters and heroes and stuff, and they mention 3 people throughout it, which are Dirk, Kamaravi, and Yorin, and as such, there are pieces of concept art for all 3 of them. On the left is an even more unhinged version of Dirk, no Aegis Core Crystal, Snake Tongue, not a skin color that would make sense for Rex or Mithra, might actually be Indoline, outfit does not have any Aghanim or any Mithril looking color scheme on it whatsoever, so there's soft confirmation for that, you're welcome. I'm kind of glad we got the final design though, this is very cursed looking. In the middle is Kamaravi. Now, this is fairly close to his final design besides the armor. His face looks relatively similar, just a bit younger maybe. And here we can see that he has a Flesh Eater core crystal with a very unique shape. It's not quite Brigid's shape, so I don't think he was ever supposed to be connected to Brigid. He seems to just be some new Agnian guy, not related to any previous character. And barring him having other concept art earlier in the book, I think his face here and just general body type are close enough to his final design where I can be confident in headcanoning that the core crystal he has here is the core crystal he has underneath his armor in his final design as well. Then we have Yorin, and oh my god, I thought Dirk was cursed. For some reason, scrawny femboy Yorin is so much worse than even that. I'm so glad we got the design we got in the final game. It's the exact same head on a completely different body. Like, I'm pretty sure if you take this picture of Yorin and go to the concept art of him in the other art book, it is the exact same head copy-pasted onto a differently drawn body. So, like, yeah, they made a body later on that much better fit the head and face, as well as the actual character. So, Kamaravi, I mean, I'm kind of mixed on. His armor is a lot more unique and cool than it is in the final game, but this might have been before they decided to homogenize the Kavesi and Agnian aesthetics a little bit. The other 2 are definitely good changes. Lastly, on 439, we can see what is probably an early version of the party in something resembling their final designs, as Mio is here depicted in her first Gormati incarnation from the earlier page, alongside early versions of the other 5 party members. These versions of the characters are obviously recognizable as the characters they are in the game, which is another reason why I have to say this version of Mio is later than the other 2 on the previous page. Now, it looks like this art predates the decision to make the Agnian color aesthetic primarily white. All the Kavesi are wearing primarily black, but it looks like most characters' colors hadn't been fully decided upon yet. Noah is wearing some red, but Senna has more red on her. Uni has zero green on her whatsoever and just has a pink belt or sash or something. And Lance is using a different blue than he has in the final game. However, it seems like as soon as they decided to make him a Machina, his final design more or less popped out, as this Lance is almost identical to the earliest looking version of Lance in the special edition art book. And it seems like that version there was just taken by refining this specific piece of art, as in that one, he's a bit more detailed, his pants are camo, and his boots have a bit more refined structure to it than just being a few lines in this piece. Uni's outfit completely changes. The leather jacket does look kind of cool. I would love to see Uni in a proper leather jacket, but the hoodie, again, fits more with the aesthetic they wanted to go with. Noah, his outfit resembles Morag more than anything, so I definitely know why they changed that, but just all of this in general does not make sense with what they decided to make everyone's clothes look like in the final game anyway, so it seems like they finalized on the appearances of the main characters before they figured out the kind of outfits everyone in the world would be wearing, and then tweaked their outfits based on that, except for Lance again. I don't really know what to say about Danganronpa character Taion here. I think the pants are the most cursed, actually, like, all things considered. Most people seem to be agreeing that every change in his design in between now and the actual game that released was a good one, so I'm just going to co-sign to that and talk about Senna. With the notable exception of Taion, her hairstyle is probably the most different in this art compared to the final game, because she has Bridget's hair buns here, or at least a smaller version of them. Perhaps she was originally intended to be connected to Bridget explicitly, but when they decided to make Mio Nia's daughter, they moved a little bit away from that with Senna because they probably only wanted one of the main cast to very obviously be a descendant from someone from one of the previous two games for thematic reasons. Senna's outfit here is entirely different, possibly different enough to suggest that her personality used to be different, as she has a skirt instead of shorts, which I don't know if I could see actual canon Senna doing that outside of like formal situations, so that could be very different. Again, she has black leggings here, more matching Mio, and her primary colors are black and red. Those are Noah's primary colors in the final game, and Noah is also wearing those two colors here, so I definitely understand why they changed Senna's entire color aesthetic to be blue to match her hair, and then a little bit of yellow because it was a primary color that wasn't used, I guess. On her chest, it looks like her top has a red or pink lacy thing on it, but that circle there suggests to me that it could potentially be a rose-shaped decoration, which would tie her even closer to Bridget if that's the case. Without the pages directly dedicated to Senna's concept art, I can't say for sure what her connection to Bridget was supposed to be or if it was intentional at all, but I think we could say based at least on this picture that it was supposed to exist at least at some point in development, and they either removed that reason or downplayed it later on. Alright, that was the warm-up, let's talk about the lore stuff. Pull up Lugalbanda's blog post alongside the video if you want to read along with what I'm saying, and let's get started. First bullet point. Takahashi thanks his staff for working on the game remotely, implying at least some of the work for Xenoblade 3 was done from home during the pandemic. This can't really be a surprise. Xenoblade 1 Definitive Edition came out in May 2020, which means that it had to have been almost entirely done by the time anything resembling lockdown started in Japan for it to have come out at that time, so that makes sense. We also know Xenoblade 3's release date was moved up by a couple months, which tracks for it having been almost done earlier than 2022 as well. Not to mention the original rumors about it that came out a couple months before it was even revealed also seems to imply that the game was nearly done, which suggests that most of the late stages of development were done in 2020 and 2021, and barring COVID delays, which seem to have pushed everything Nintendo did back by like a year, the game could have been like a holiday 2021 release. That, coupled with the fact that it seems like they were sitting on a largely finished Xenoblade 3 for some extended period of time, means that we could be seeing the next proper Xenoblade game sooner than we think, but if I'm right about Xenosaga, and I'm probably right about Xenosaga, we're going to be seeing that in between, so get ready for Takahashi to make you violently angry with something related to that later, but we're not quite there yet. Speaking of the name Xenosaga though, the only time it appears in any of this stuff is in stuff that was not even translated by Lugalbanda. Xenosaga and Xenoblade X are mentioned, but only in the sense of artists or developers talking about having worked on it or having been inspired by those games, causing them to join Monolith in the first place. So we knew there was no Bandai Namco trademark on this book for months anyway. It was unlikely they would legally be able to talk about a lot of Xenosaga stuff in the first place, and if there's going to be a Xenosaga remake, they have to hold things closer to their chest until that's announced in the first place, so the focus of all of this stuff is just the trilogy, and I'm actually kind of glad it's that way. They can save the connections for when the connections actually start happening in the games themselves. Next up, regarding the Black Fog, here is Takahashi's quote. Looking at the survey, the first thing that can be answered, I believe, is regarding the Black Fog. Basically, it's a sign that the worlds of 1 and 2 are approaching. Those signs are appearing in another world, the opposite world. For example, in Xenoblade Definitive Edition, the Fog King appeared on Shulk's side. Looking at it from a different perspective, a similar phenomenon was occurring on Rex's side, just that this wasn't portrayed. In Xenoblade 2, I believe there is a monster called Infernal Guldo. As the worlds approach each other, a Guldo that is in the land of Moritha from 2 is being projected to the opposite world. That's the kind of phenomenon that's occurring. The Fog King, the Black Fog monsters, that's what that's all about. To put it simply, the two worlds have attached together partially, and the effect of that is a phenomenon in which you see the materialization of particles as a black fog. And when that is heightened, annihilation occurs. Quite a few of my staff might not know about this either. And by the way, the woman on the ID card that the Guldo drops is from an ordinary woman. It is not Galea. This is, say it with me for the first time in this video, and definitely not the last, stuff that was basically said directly in the game, and when it wasn't, stuff I'd been talking about since the game first came out. It was already obvious that the Black Fog heralded annihilation events, and I've been saying since Future Connected came out that the Fog Beast and Fog King and the rifts there were some sort of heralding of worlds coming together. Also, the Infernal Guldo not being Galea is something that I have said probably since 2018. There is new information though. The Fog King and Fog Beasts are basically Gnosis because they're projections of things from another world, so that does still track with what I've been saying. But we do have explicit confirmation that the Fog King looking like the Infernal Guldo is because it was literally a projection of a Guldo and not just an asset reuse thing. It seems to imply that this is a different Infernal Guldo than the one from 2, so it's probably one that was still alive at the time in Xenoblade 2's world, as opposed to the dead Infernal Guldo that had been dead for a year somehow being projected over, which is heightened by the fact that, yeah, the Infernal Guldo was just some woman and not anyone important, which means this one is just a uniquely powerful Guldo being projected over who is likely also not anyone important in the original world. We also do have confirmation now that something like Future Connected happened on the Xenoblade 2 side, which is technically something we didn't know about. It's not explicitly said anywhere, so while you could reasonably guess after Xenoblade 3 that something like that was happening, we sort of didn't know that anyone from Allrest knew about Black Fog and that kind of thing until Aionios happened. There's no game about it because we haven't gotten Xenoblade 2 Definitive Edition yet. Maybe we will in the future, I don't know. Presumably, their most powerful Fog Beasts were some sort of projection of something from the Xenoblade 1 world that probably doesn't exist in the 2 one. I'm going to assume then that they fought Ghost Telethia because that's a really cool mental image. Next up, regarding if Lance is a Machina, Takahashi responds, so if the question is whether or not Lance is a Machina, yes, he is one, ... There are several paragraphs of discussion that he goes on that Lugobanda didn't bother translating because you should have known that Lance was a Machina already. That can't possibly be a surprise. That better not have been a surprise. According to machine translation, the rest of what he talks about starts with reminding you that the young Machina in Xenoblade 1 did look almost exactly like Hams, just with different skin and hair color, and that all of the unique stuff that they wear is actually just clothing and not part of their bodies. So Lance is closer to what a Machina looks like without all that stuff on, and he doesn't know about that stuff because Machina culture has been removed in Aionios because thematic reasons. So yeah, you should have known all this already. Alright, here's the part that's going to make you very mad or very excited depending on what your opinions on some of Xenoblade 3 are. Takahashi says about the survey, regarding most questions that were written in the survey, almost all of them have proper answers. However, I'm just not answering them now since I don't think it's necessary at this point. So for those sorts of things, well, if Monolith Soft is fortunate enough to continue creating things in the future, then I think we will be able to answer it at a certain point. For example, I understand that there are many requests to see what happens after the ending. However, if we were to do that, we would have to make what lies further beyond from Xenoblade 3. So, I understand the sentiment, but please hold for a bit. If you can look forward to it and wait, that would be appreciated. We're doing a bit of reading between the lines here, but I interpret this as him saying, yeah, there's a reason that most of the lore explanations in here are just explaining subtext. If I don't talk about something here, chances are there is a canon explanation for it that has already been established. It's just going to be a spoiler for a future game, so I can't talk about it quite yet. Please wait for Xenoblade 4, where you'll get some more answers. I think we kind of already figured that Xenoblade 4 was going to follow up on this continuity after the ending of Future Redeemed, and this is just a little bit more confirmation of that kind of thing. The only issue with all of this is that I think Xenosaga is coming next. And while yes, a proper remake of the Xenosaga trilogy will probably introduce some small retcons to tie it better into Xenoblade, they're not going to explain unanswered questions of Xenoblade 3 in that. So it'll actually be 2 games until some of this stuff has proper explanations. I don't know. Xenosaga better be next year. All the stuff I've been saying about how the next Xenoblade game might be sooner than we thought and not another 5 years better have been right. Oh god, this series is a very funny one. We are not allowed to get off the wild ride anytime soon. Next up is some genuinely new information about Origin. Regarding the admin of Origin. Regarding the world of Aionios, or rather the way Origin works, there is a proper reason for it. In actuality, there's this and that reason, and that's why this world is constructed as such. That kind of thing. Now that, I can't say it yet. Yeah, now is not the timing for that. Again, a lot of the explanation that makes Aionios easier to comprehend is well entrenched in Xenosaga spoilers, so if there is a Xenosaga thing coming next, it would behoove him to just wait until he can point at Xenosaga and say, yeah, pay attention to the encephalon and imaginary number domain. Aionios is one of those things. So for now, it's fine to think of it as basically a virtual world. That wouldn't be wrong. To put it simply, the administrator of that world could do anything, and in the main story of Xenoblade 3, that was Zed. That's the story, yes. I'm going to be very clear here, he is not saying Aionios was literally a simulation. It is closer to a dream world or cognitive realm. Like, it has more things in common with the other world in a Persona game than it does the Matrix, if that helps at all. It's a little complicated because Origin is at its heart a computer and is the thing responsible for Aionios, but it isn't literally a digital simulation of mishmashed parts of the worlds of Xenoblade 1 and 2. That being said, because Origin is effectively a very big artificial blade, and because Ontos was heavily involved in its construction, it still sort of works under computer rules, and Zed took over administrator privileges around the time of Future Redeemed, which is how he was able to control the world the way he did. Next up is a fairly long segment about the philosophy behind the villains. For the villains of Xenoblade 3, Takahashi says, and as an editor's note, skipping over some parts, so this isn't a complete translation of this section of the interview even. I wanted to change a bit how the villains were portrayed. For example, in Xenoblade 1 and 2, the villains had their own pride or their own principles. It could be a philosophy or even faith, but the villains had their own sense of justice. But for Xenoblade 3, I had a bit of, what if I brought the enemies closer to reality? In terms of what is reality, let's say, for example, those in positions of power. Saying people in positions of power are villains is, well, a bit of a dangerous way to put it. Well, let's just say as an example. In real-life society, they are the system. As Zed says, they can decide on a system, and they can run it. Even for those people in positions of power, I'm sure they have a life story, social ties and such. But what we can see at the surface, what we can feel is their roots. Most of that is, how should I say this, a desire. A desire for control, money, fame, and maybe very rarely lust. That's where it tends to be rooted in, and occasionally some unsavory people show themselves. What if those people were the villains? So the villains this time around are the Mobius, and for them I wanted to make them villains you couldn't sympathize with by exaggerating the unsavoriness and patheticness that real-life humans have. Towards the end of the story, I believe there's a scene where Zed says, "It's because it amuses me." But that line, it could be, "It's because 3-star restaurants taste delectable," or "It's because I love to make money." That line can be whatever. We place the Mobius in that position as a representation of that unsavory aspect of reality. Famously apolitical sword video game series strikes again. Bring out the purple Pikmin.
What's this doing here?
So yeah, people have basically been interpreting Mobius as representations of powerful, unjust people in society who only use their power for their own benefit and don't care about anyone else because that is what they are towards Aionios. And this is just confirmation that that was the real world inspiration for all of that. It was very intentionally about not even necessarily outwardly corrupt people in power, but selfish people in power, and how systems tend to be maintained to keep those people in power and not actually benefit anyone else. I also definitely don't think it was a mistake that the will of young people pushing for a brighter future is what ultimately topples Mobius. If all of this real world, social and political inspiration was intentional, then I'm sure that part was too. Next up, commenting on N's sword. What's inside the Sword of the End that N holds? That would be Logos. I mean, it's Malos, but Malos for the time being is dead or has disappeared. As to why Malos is there, I'm sorry about this, but I can't answer that at this point. But what N is holding there, that is Malos himself. Again, official confirmation of stuff I and other people have been talking about basically since Future Redeemed came out, but this is slightly more than just that. It was fairly evident that Logos to some degree was involved with N's Sword of the End, but this seems to be confirmation that it's no one else's souls from Origin involved in it. It's just the Logos core, and not just the Logos core, but Malos himself, which is not something we really thought about. We thought it was going to be a wiped clean Logos core and that Malos did completely die, but no, it does seem like for the time being he's either dead or gone. And like, let's just talk about brand synergy for a minute here. Malos is the personification of Logos, who is part of the Trinity processor. The Trinity processor that is themed around the Christian Trinity of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Logos represents the Son, meaning, to at least some degree, Malos is inspired by Jesus Christ. Do you know a very iconic thing Jesus is known to have done according to Christian teachings? We all thought that him disappearing at the end of Torna and coming back 500 years later was that. But no, apparently he is going to come back again, and that is going to be the Xenoblade series' actual reference to the resurrection of Jesus. By the way, this book comes out a day after Easter. How much of this was intentional? What are they actually trying to accomplish by doing this anymore? It's easy to make jokes about how Jesus physically shows up in a flashback in Xenosaga, but like, they're doing the exact same references they did in Saga again here. And if Saga is now canon to this, that means it is just double Jesus. We have Jesus too now. Like, yeah, this is just largely another instance of Xenogames using Judeo-Christian references and symbology, and Xenogames reusing plot points and thematic elements from other Xenogames, but how does this work now that two sets of Xenogames that talked about the same stuff in different ways are now connected? Are there going to be people having to reckon with all of this? I don't know. That's a question for 4 years from now, probably. I'll see you in 2030. Yeah, we're not done with Trinity processor stuff either, by the way. Next up, regarding Matthew's gauntlets. Next, Matthew's gauntlets. The Fists of the End. Numa is inside there, and therefore both Pyra and Mithra. You can think of it as both of their wills being present within the gauntlet. This, along with the Malos bullet point, does clear up something that I was unsure about even after Xenoblade 2. My little pet headcanon was basically that when Numa split into Pyra and Mithra, not only was it just a gift from Klaus to allow them to live separate lives, but also a way of maintaining the sanctity of the Trinity processor. In the sense that, yeah, Numa is being split up, but because Malos was killed, we need a Logos and a Numa still, so one of them is still Numa, but the other one becomes the new Logos. With confirmation that Malos, not Logos, but Malos, is an End sword, and both Pyra and Mithra are representing Numa in the Fists of the End, that seems to indicate that Pyra and Mithra post-Xenoblade 2 are still both Numa. I doubt they're copies of Numa. They're probably, like, half of Numa, and if Numa is ever needed, they probably don't need to, like, actually fusion dance back into the green form. They can just both supply power to Rex at the same time, and they'll be able to still do all the same Numa stuff he could do before, but Logos is still a completely separate entity from Pyra or Mithra, and all three of the siblings from Xenoblade 2 still persist to some degree, with a heavy indication that Malos is coming back. If he can't say why Malos is in the sword yet, it's another Xenoblade 4 thing. My guess is Testament Malos. Play Xenosaga. Takahashi follows this up with more information about who was in specific weapons. Regarding Lucky 7, and Lucky 7, which Noah came to wield, this is actually, this is not mentioned within the story, but Fiora is inside of it. In regards to the above statement about Lucky 7, nobody that was present for the interview seemed to be aware of this information, and the statement caused a bit of a stir, with all of them simply asking in response, Fiora? Elaborating on it, he states, while some people like Shulk and Rex appear in this world in the flesh, some people appear as an object, and that is an expression or reflection of their traits or thoughts. Things like, how can I change this world? I think this is the best way to do so. Think of it as something like that. So, I've obviously been saying, since the game came out, that other party members from Xenoblade 1 and 2 were present in Lucky 7. I was right in that Fiora is in Lucky 7, but I was wrong in that only Fiora is in Lucky 7. The big thing here, and the only truly new piece of information, is a proper explanation of how Origin avatars work. The only confirmed ones we've seen so far were ones where the characters physically manifested into the world as something resembling their previous forms from the original world. As Takahashi said, like Shulk and Rex. But now we know that characters' avatars can also be in the form of certain objects. I'm not 100% sure if all of these special objects have to be made out of Origin metal. However, some machine-translated parts of this passage seem to indicate that Takahashi then goes on to describe that all the pieces of Origin metal you pick up throughout the playthrough probably have some characters in them, but he hasn't decided who's in which one specifically, so you're allowed to headcanon which one is Rhine, for example. I kind of doubt every single generic shard of Origin metal you can find in the world that's used for upgrading the character's blades is an important character. Like, yeah, some of them are probably minor NPCs or like rare blades or stuff like that. But my guess would be that specifically these shards of Origin metal you needed to upgrade the boundary into the bravery are important characters, as well as every single piece that Nia herself used to make an Ouroboros stone. Also remember, the blade, the inner metal part of Noah's Lucky 7 is Fiora, or contains Fiora rather, while N's entire weapon appears to just contain Malos. Despite the fact that he has an outer sword and an inner metal Lucky 7 like Noah does, it seems like his entire thing is Malos. This article does not confirm or deny whether or not Riku used parts of what was left over from Matthew's Fists of the End to help construct Noah's gauntlet when he takes Lucky 7 as a young soldier, so it is possible that Noah's weapon does contain Numa, as in Pyra and Mithra, and Fiora, and I think that does make sense, because that would mean that, yes, Numa and Logos combine to defeat Ontos at the end of Future Redeemed, but also that Noah versus N is basically a rematch of Numa versus Malos in Xenoblade 2, and after Noah returns N to being part of him, he then once again has both Logos and Numa fighting against a usurper of Ontos, that is Zed. Going back to the virtual world metaphor, it makes sense that some people manifest as people and some people manifest as objects. The word used is avatar for a reason, and it seems like it is avatar in like the online sense. Some of your profile pictures are people, some of them are yourselves, some of them are characters, some of them are just other humans out there in the world, and some of them are not. Like, Fiora's profile picture in Aionios is a sword, so her will is manifest as Lucky 7. Shulk's profile picture was a selfie, so he manifests as Shulk's body. But either way, it is still those characters' wills moving on to try and help the soldiers free themselves from the Flame Clock and free the entire world from Mobius. Other things that I think are candidates for actually being other important characters are the Ricky Biter you can find in Lomac the Wildwood, guarded by a super boss. That could just be Ricky and not something in commemoration of him, which means that yes, you can equip Ricky to Riku if that's true, as well as the special unique Legacy of the 7 accessories that you can find in relatively late game areas and side quests. Editing Luxon with speculation not directly backed up by anything in the interview. I think we now can make a good guess about what it specifically means to have a weapon of the End. N's Sword of the End is known to have Malos in it. Matthew's Fists of the End are known to have Pyra and Mithra in it. And there is a difference between Lucky 7 and the Sword of the End. So I am thinking this is more potential indication that Noah's blade does contain the Pneuma core or the Pneuma origin metal as well, and the distinction between just Lucky 7, which is just Fiora, and the Sword of the End, which is her and potentially Pneuma as well, is him awakening and being able to use the Pneuma powers. Again, when Lucky 7 is awakened, he can use Monado arts, which backs that up as well, though obviously Fiora was a Monado wielder in her past life, so it could come from her too. To properly explain why Fiora manifested as the sword she did, and not just any old slightly better than usual sword, will take reading several more bullet points, because the game's actual director, Kojima, makes a joke about Noah throwing Lucky 7 into the ocean at the end of the game. And Takahashi starts by riffing on this, but then uses it as a jumping off point to explain some more in-depth things. It's not explicitly canon, or at least not confirmed in the parts that have been translated, but when I'm reading through this and discussing it, I'm going to go under the assumption that Noah's blade by the end of Xenoblade 3 also contains the Pneuma bits of Matthew's Fists of the End, in addition to the part of the sword that is Fiora's will manifest. Kojima asks Takahashi, Noah threw Lucky 7 into the ocean at the end of the game. Was that okay? Presumably he's joking here because Fiora is the sword and has already almost drowned once already, so you don't want that to happen again. Takahashi responds as follows. This conversation, how do I put this? It deals with the fundamental aspect of Origin. Origin in Aionios. You can think of it broadly as a virtual world. Think of it like a server in a virtual world. It actually isn't the case, but this will be fine for demonstration purposes. And within that, there's source code that's running. And as a way to express that, it can take the form of a sword, but also not. And Alvis was responsible for the general management of Origin systems. As the administrator, Alvis was quietly watching for a while after Origin started up. As this was happening, Zed, a partial administrator and collective conscious-like entity, starts doing things on its own. The story of Future Redeemed starts when Alvis deems this unacceptable. Continuing, he states, many things happen after that, but A ends up siding with Shulk & Co., so there was no longer a general admin. And so, Zed replaced that position, and that's why Zed can mess with the source code. Making the human lifespan 10 years and observing it because it's amusing and things like that, although the 10-year lifespan was a change made to the code prior to Future Redeemed. Basically, you could do a whole lot of things. He can be brazen about it. When thinking about what can be done to break that source code, this is where you use external powers. I believe this was stated in the story, but a kind of power that exists outside the flow will be necessary. In regards to what that power would be, it can be the power of the will of young people living in this world, and regardless of Pneuma or Logos, it's the same kind of entity as Alvis, and thus an external factor from Zed's point of view. Therefore, combining these powers, and we're taking the world for ourselves, that would be the broad explanation of Origin-related things. He adds by saying, to put it bluntly, Alvis, who was one person that was the core processor, as well as the possessor of the Monado, Shulk, and similarly, the possessor, no, partner of the same processor, Rex. These three sustain the world, and the main characters outside of those are lending their strength to the characters in Aionios. That's the structure. So when Noah throws Lucky 7 into the ocean at the end, he was like this. He was pondering like this before throwing it. That was like saying thanks to the sword. Thanks for everything, that kind of thing. Something like, the battle is over and a new world is starting. Thank you. And thus it's liberated. Return to the world. It was returned. Return to Origin. So yeah, obviously Kojima was joking around about, oh no, it's a terrible thing. Fiora is going to get rusty now. Woo! The explanation for that is exactly what we expected when we were theorizing about Lucky 7 containing multiple people and more than just one. Noah is saying goodbye to the sword, thanking it for its service, even though he doesn't know it contains people's souls or anything, and being grateful that it's no longer necessary to fight, so he is throwing it into the ocean as symbolism of moving on to a newer, better world that doesn't require such things. Because the people in the sword are in Origin, they're going to get restored like everyone else who was in Origin. And even like people who became physical body avatars like Shulk and Rex will also be restored later on. So that's largely another thing I've been saying, but the wording here is slightly ambiguous in a way I didn't expect it to be, where you could interpret it as the sword returning to Origin when Noah throws it, and not when Origin kicks back in and the worlds are reset. So like, I was under the impression that he throws Lucky 7, it lands in the water and sinks to the bottom of Erythia Sea, then everyone in it gets restored to their normal bodies when Origin reboots. but I guess you could also read it as the sword disintegrating into light motes and returning people to Origin when he throws it. So, like, as soon as it dips below the edge of Keves Castle and Noah can't see it anymore, it vanishes and Fiora, Pyra, and Mythra are back to where they were in Origin, and then they're rebuilt. That means literally nothing. It has zero impact on anything, but I guess it's a possibility now. Of course, this stuff isn't the most important part of these passages. What actually matters is the new Alvis stuff, and this clarifies a few things, namely how Mobius came to be in the first place. I was under the impression that the Ontos core went dormant after Xenoblade 1 and stayed that way until Alpha awoke during Future Redeemed, but it appears that that wasn't exactly the case, and Origin actively included Alvis as an administrative personality to some degree in its design, in addition to just involving the Ontos core in its construction and basing its structure on it. From this, it seems like something like Zed coming into existence was always intended, that there was going to be a collective unconscious type entity arising simply because so many people's consciousnesses were stored in one place, but the fact that he ended up becoming Mobius and embodying that will and wanting Aionios to exist was what was unintended. Zed wasn't entirely subversive in what he did to Origin. It appears that this entity was always supposed to be some sort of sub-administrator with some degree of influence over it in case something went wrong, but because Aionios came into existence, Zed wanted it to remain that way and was able to go behind Alvis's back to start creating things, like the 10-year cycle, the colonies, the flame clocks, and all that. Basically, he got the world to the point where it was in Future Redeemed, and a few years before then, Alvis finally took notice and was either influenced by the idea of Mobius, or corrupted by it in a way, or simply saw that the people of the original worlds were doing what Zed was doing and causing all of this suffering in the first place, and decided that only the new life in Aionios was worth saving, thus leading to Alpha. This completely explains something we couldn't figure out about Future Redeemed. The first scene of Future Redeemed, where Zed refers to Alpha as his god. Alpha did initially have a higher position in the chain of command for Origin, but after he was destroyed in Future Redeemed, Zed was able to take over that role. It also makes the parallels that X, Y, and Z have to Pneuma, Logos, and Ontos respectively make more sense. Zed wasn't just pulling the concept of the Trinity processor out of people's memories, he was being the representative of Ontos in his own Mobius Trinity, specifically because he was usurping a captain's chair that belonged to the real Ontos in the first place. We were memeing on Dirk talking about the Passage of Fate and that never meaning anything, but it actually kind of makes a little bit more sense now. The Passage of Fate he mentions is the same thing as the flow Zed always talks about, and it seems like that is kind of similar to the Passage of Fate in Xenoblade 1, largely because they're referring to the world as dictated by Ontos. All that Zed can control is the Ontos stuff of Origin. Ouroboros was created by a union of Logos's and Pneuma's power, so it is able to subvert Mobius' influence. And any avatars or Origin metal that carry the will of people from Xenoblade 1 or 2 are also able to subvert it. Not because they have Aegis power of any sort, but because they're able to lend their strength to the wills of young people aiming for change, which directly opposes not only the kind of change Ontos himself wanted as Alpha, but also the kind of stasis that Zed wanted after taking on the pseudo-Ontos role. It also seems like it specifically had to be Shulk, Rex, and A who stepped into Origin to keep Aionios propped up for 1,000 years, and it couldn't have been any of the party members to do it. It was actually their close relationship to the Trinity processor that allowed them to sustain Origin systems in a way. A is the only remaining piece of Ontos after Alpha is destroyed, and in reality, I kind of view A as Shulk's blade, if that makes sense, at least in terms of where A's personality came from and relationships and philosophy and all that, but regardless, the actual Ontos themselves. Then Shulk, who was a previous Monado wielder and had access to the full power of Ontos in the past, and then Rex, who apparently, just by having married Pneuma twice, is also on the same level as those two. The next bullet point is something that really shouldn't have needed to be said at all. Speaking about the people of the city, he has this to say. After that, it's time to say farewell. It's split between the Kevesi, the people of Bionis, and the Agnians, the people of Alrest. And in another corner, there's the people of the city, and those three make up the structure. But I saw quite a number of comments in the survey asking about what happened to the people in the city. So to answer that, and this is something that I believe you could also understand from the information in the story, the people of the city, their life that doesn't exist in the original two worlds, and yet they still exist, despite Origin being something like a memory machine that collected data from both worlds. This is in fact a suggestion that the two worlds will become one, and that these people will absolutely be born in the future. That's the structure. So yes, Gondor, Monica, they will be born in the new world. When he says that you should be able to understand this from the information in the story, he's not just pointing out bad media literacy. He's pointing out bad regular literacy. Gondor looks directly into the camera and says this in the final cutscene. She hopes amongst hope that there is a chance the people of the city will be reborn, and, you know, given all the indications that the worlds combine again, and everything everyone wanted will actually happen in the end, this was a foregone conclusion from the instant you saw the ending of the base game for the first time. It shouldn't have taken an art book and thousands of people writing in to figure this out. This was known. The only ambiguity here is how exactly people will be reborn, and that's simply because the sequence of events that led to everyone from the city being born in the first place within Aionios is not going to happen again because the cycle doesn't exist, and everyone who was soldiers is now just living a normal lifespan in the same world at the same time. So, while yes, Noah and Mio are still going to get together and make a Gondor, when the other people get reincarnated, they might not literally be as the children of the same parents they had the first time, and things like the race, their sex, their hair and eye color might be different, though it will still be recognizably the same person. There is a chance, say, that yes, Noah and Mio have a child that is Old Man Gondor, but then another couple, maybe one that never met or never had children within Aionios, of two people who became soldiers, they will get together and they'll have a kid who uses the soul of Monica. So, like, Monica will still happen, but within the same generation as Old Man Gondor, who was over 1,000 years older than her, which must have been dozens of generations. Or we'll get something like being able to have Matthew and Niall actually interact with relatively younger versions of Noah and Mio, simply because these versions of them were not their direct descendants and they were born in a generation earlier than Noah and Mio's great-grandkids. Because it took so many unlikely events happening for any given pair of soldiers to actually have a kid together in the first place, there are going to be less kids from the generation that was just directly born of two soldiers than there will be kids that generation has in the combined world. So they're going to start immediately having to pull from souls in Origin in future generations, and while we don't know population numbers, it'll probably only be a few generations before all the souls of city folk in Origin are exhausted and actual new people will be created for the first time again. In a slight clarification, the next bullet point says that Noah and his friends are fighting for a world in which city people can be properly born. Lugalbanda leaves this just paraphrased because this will be touched on later in more thorough and more extensive translations by a larger group of people, but I think the intent is still clear. While the city people being reborn is only really mentioned in Nia's hero quest, which canonically takes place before the final battle, but you can't unlock until after you've beaten the game once, and in the ending cutscene, it seems like making a world for the city people in addition to freeing all the soldiers and setting things to right was an intended, stated goal of the main party before the final battle, and this kind of thing wasn't just sprung on them after the fact. Takahashi says that through the lens of Nietzsche, Noah as a character can be understood to be an ubermensch that rejects nihilism. You should play the Xenosaga series. Its games are directly titled after publications by Friedrich Nietzsche. You will understand all of this a whole lot more if you do. Next up, Luxon do believe that it's Riku time. On the subject of Riku, Takahashi says, Riku, he's sly. He's doing all these things while completely understanding everything that's going on. When he says in the city, meh, there's something tiny and cute over there, he's saying that on purpose, to bring attention to it, saying, hey, look there, there's a really tiny person, and look, it's different from you guys, and getting an emotional response out of them, I suppose. He's a bit two-faced, isn't he? His master pawn is Melia, so Melia has entrusted him with what is basically Fiora, and of course, he is also one of Ricky's sons, yes. Speaking about Riku's explanations about the Lucky Seven and its grandiose origins, specifically about the line, 7 legendary swordsmith pawn over a course of 7 years, forged from 7 types of steel. Takahashi says those were quote-unquote convenient lies that Riku made up. So yes, I believe we can just take the Riku lie counter and send it to Mobius Infinity, because he made up even more stuff than we knew about. Also, wow, Riku was Ricky's son and not Kino's? I wonder if I made a video like last week that rigorously explained why that's probably the case. Honestly, this entire Riku section is more or less reinforcing everything I said in the Riku video. Who could have possibly guessed that it would age well this quickly? The only real thing is to point out a mistranslation. The real reason we were surprised that Fiora was the only one in Lucky 7 is because Riku uses plural when talking about the amount of people in Lucky 7. Now, this is to be expected as a thing that could happen in localization simply because the nature of singular versus plural nouns is more ambiguous in Japanese, and I believe the line where Riku's talking to Matthew and says important people are in the sword leans a little bit more towards singular in the original Japanese, though English is not the only localization to get this wrong, but I think I know where the mistake came from. And that is when Riku is talking to Shulk in a story cutscene, not an optional one, he specifically says that important people are here, mentioning Lucky 7, and also with Shulk here, mentioning Shulk's Monado Rex Plus. So the intent behind this scene was probably either Riku being metaphorical and just saying that, yes, the wills of all of Shulk's friends are there helping because of the origin medal, or saying that, yeah, Fiora's in Lucky 7 and someone else, maybe Ryan or Dunban, is in Shulk's weapon, and the localizers took that ambiguity and thought he was referring to multiple people being in Lucky 7 itself. This is a very easy explanation for a very reasonable mistake to make. Next, more infuriating Napon stuff. On the Napon, he has this to say. In this world, the world of Aionios, Napon are external entities residing outside the flow so they don't have a lifespan. They live forever. The Manana lie counter is now equal to the Riku lie counter. Napon have just committed to the bit really hard. That is hilarious. This is not the full translation of the passage, and I don't think I'm really going to fully explain it until a full translation of that entire Napon explanation is given, just because there is some context missing that would ruin the discussion if I tried to fully talk about it now, but I do believe any Napon with an age on the affinity chart in the main game was just lying about it, which is amazing. Next up, speaking of that subject, Kojima notes that some survey responders asked about why Shulk and Rex have lived for such a long time, to which Takahashi responds, Shulk and Rex haven't lived long, have they? Origin is only a recreation of the worlds that used to exist, and if you think of them as being emulated, they should only be able to live what their lifespan is. Shulk and Rex, they defeat Alpha some years after arriving to Aionios, and they shift to sustaining it after that. But how should I say this? Their rank is the same as Alvis and the rest of the Trinity processor. This is also true for Melia, Nia, and Fiora, who possess Mainet's Monado. In other words, if the admin handles it, anything can be done. If the source code of that world is written as a recreation of reality, then if, for example, the lifespan was set as 80 years old, when they say they can give their lifespans to Glimmer and Nikal, they can if they rewrite the code. But you normally shouldn't do that, because you don't know what kind of glitches will occur. In response, A says this is against the rules, and that's sort of the idea there. I brought this up as a possibility a while ago, but yeah, people whose physical bodies are brought into Aionios as avatars of Origin didn't necessarily all come into Aionios at the same time. Shulk and Rex seems like they only popped up when they were initially needed to fight Alpha in the first place. The fact that this timescale is potentially different also suggests to me that yeah, only children from the original worlds could be born as soldiers. Basically, it's not that Shulk and Rex are like Napon and don't age at all within Aionios. It's that they were only in Aionios for a couple years, so they're already old enough where aging a couple years isn't too visibly noticeable, and then after that, they sort of ascended to having a pseudo-Trinity processor role alongside A, propping the world up, so they then went beyond the concept of aging in the first place. Their rank superseded that of mortal people who can die of old age, and they were able to mess around with the source code of the world and give their initial flagged to die after 80 years instead of after 10 years to Nikal and Glimmer. A is only potentially against this because it might cause glitches in the system and screw things up later on. Honestly, Shulk and Rex messing around like this, screwing around with the lifespan of one Kavesi and one Agnian, might even be how Noah and Mio were able to get back in the system after they both had Homecoming. Who knows? That's genuinely a possibility. In that case, A was being way too cautious because, like, that glitch is the reason the world survived. And yeah, A is just being reserved and Ontos like, while Shulk and Rex were being, hey, no, if Pyra, Mithra, or Malos were here, they'd just let us do this without complaining at all because it's the right thing to do. Yippee. Shulk and Rex's increased rank is specifically because they stepped into Origin to prop up Aionios and wasn't intrinsic to them like it seems was the case for A and Melia and Nia. Melia and Nia makes sense because they're the queens. We now know that Lucky 7 was partially Fiora's doing in addition to Melia, so Nia kind of has the better creation of things with Origin Medal feat now, but like the queens are said to be on even keel. They fight on even keel in the final battle. Nia was able to make the Ouroboros stones, which are able to subvert Mobius and the will of Origin in a major way, so it makes sense that those two are also of a higher rank, and more or less indicates that the reason they don't physically age throughout Aionios' history isn't because they're in stasis or anything, but because they're on the Trinity Processor immortal tier of influence within the world, so they're above that. Remember, Shulk and Rex were not of that tier until the end of Future Redeemed, so they were mortal with old age up until then. The big deal, though, is that Fiora is also Trinity Processor level, and this makes sense. She is the lighter colored Lucky 7, which is the counterpart to the black Lucky 7, which we now know is Malos, an actual Trinity Processor person. So yeah, it makes sense. The swords are able to fight on even keel. It is the power of Ouroboros and having allies that makes Noah win out over N in the first place. So yeah, Fiora is also on Trinity Processor level within Aionios. And like, yeah, obviously, Lucky 7 subverts Mobius, it cuts flame clocks. That all works out, no problem. The big deal, though, is that Fiora is at this level because she, too, is a Monado wielder. All of the Maineth stuff came back around and allowed Fiora to be worthy of manifesting herself with this much power within Aionios. Fiora stocks are through the roof, and the explicit mention of Maineth's Monado here, alongside Galea Guldo being deconfirmed, really heavily hints that there's part of Galea out there in some other universe we've yet to see. Next, about the light motes. About golden motes, he has this to say. Golden motes, that's ascension, translator's note in the context of death. Yeah, dissipation, and it turns into a form that's difficult, no, impossible for Zed and the Mobius to use, disappearing to outside their systems without being used by the Mobius. Basically, Homecoming, citizens, anyone not in the cycle who dies, they get golden motes. That just basically means they can't be brought back into the cycle unless you're Noah and Mio. Lastly, Takahashi says the hooded boy at the start of Chapter 6 is a part of N that resides deep within Noah's psyche. This time I'm going to tell you to play Xenogears instead of Xenosaga. As an additional bit of context, this is noticeable if you look at the machine translation as well, but I also was able to find a while ago, young Noah's dub voice actor did a commentary of the scenes he appears in, and also says that hooded Noah in the flashback is a combination of young Noah and Mio. So it's the Xenogears reference and also a slight bit of Mio and M post-mind swap helping him along the way to self-actualize. The last bullet point is simply Takahashi's outro to the interview. The final comment. Xenoblade was released in 2010, and some of our customers have been with us throughout those 14 years, continuing to follow us, and that makes me deeply emotional. The only thing I have to say to that is, thank you. We would like to continue to meet the expectations of those who have supported us in that way. With up to Xenoblade 3 finished, I'm sure there's plenty of customers who feel that this isn't enough. They want to know this or that, and that this book isn't enough to cover it, but we have heard those voices from our customers loud and clear. Gradually, I suppose or in the future, during the creation process, we would like to respond to those voices. So please, look forward to that. That would be it. Yes. We already knew there were intentions to continue the Xenoblade series, and after Future Redeemed, we already knew that there were intentions to continue this specific continuity of Xenoblade. But here it looks like Takahashi accidentally showed his hand as to the real purpose of the survey. And that is basically what the Smash ballot in Smash 4 was. Yeah, the only stuff that can really be explained in this interview is clarifying subtext, because anything else would be a spoiler for future games. They're taking feedback and questions that fans want answered here, but they can't answer the ones that aren't already evident within the game themselves, because they're taking notes for how to include concepts from that in future games. Just in this art book, there's not really enough room to elaborate on all that kind of stuff more, but in Xenoblade 4, there's absolutely enough time to do all that. Only one character was included from the Smash ballot, Because the whole purpose of the ballot wasn't to decide Smash 4's last DLC character, but to gauge interest in who people might want to see as newcomers in Smash Ultimate. This is, I think, exactly what's going on here, which means that yes, while it's probably going to be a while because Xenosaga, there's a lot to look forward to in the next Xenoblade game. I am not making a big outro this time. We got more Artbook stuff to look into. Until then, this is Luxon, signing off.